Nobody told Commander Vathis Oran that the human would be young. That was the first mistake. He had requested a combat specialist from the Terran Liaison Office, filled out the proper forms, submitted the requisition through 4 different bureaucratic layers of the Galactic Compact, and waited 11 standard days for a response. When arrived at Outpost Delvari 9, stepping off a dusty transport shuttle with a pack slung over one shoulder and a thermos of something hot in her hand, was a human female who looked, by Vethis's best estimate, like she had recently graduated from whatever educational institution humans use to teach their offspring how to operate cutlery. She had a braid down her back. She was chewing something. She was looking at the outpost's perimeter wall with the mild interest of someone evaluating whether a fence needed painting. Vethis turned to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Pruvok, and said, very quietly, "There has been an administrative error." Pruvok, whose species communicated distress through the involuntary darkening of their facial ridges, had gone approximately the color of a bruise. Her file says she is 19 standard years. That is not possible. Her file also says she has 41 confirmed engagements. Vethis looked at the human again. She had finished surveying the perimeter wall, and was now looking at the two of them with an expression he was learning to identify as the human version of patience, which apparently looked almost identical to the human version of mild amusement. The distinction, he was told, was in the eyes. He had not yet learned to read human eyes. He suspected this would become a problem. "Specialist," he said, walking toward her and drawing himself to his full height, which was considerable. Vethis Oran was nearly 2.5 meters of Dravathi officer, all angular joints and iridescent exoskeleton, with 4 eyes arranged in a horizontal line across his face. He was, by most objective measures, visually intimidating. "I am Commander Vethis Oran. You are the combat specialist assigned to assist with the Delvari pacification operation." The human looked up at him. She did not appear intimidated. "Yep," she said. A pause. "That is all you have to say?" She considered this. "The perimeter sensors on your east wall are offset by about 12 degrees. You've got a blind spot roughly 4 meters wide near the 3rd support post." She sipped from her thermos. "Just thought you should know." Pruvok made a sound behind Vethis that was not technically a word in any recognized language. Her name, according to her file, was Specialist Kael Dunmore, attached to the Terran Combined Forces, 3rd Rapid Response Division. The file described her specialization as adaptive close engagement tactics, which, when Vethis later asked a human diplomat what that meant, produced an uncomfortable silence followed by the response, "It means she is very good at figuring out how to win fights that she should lose." The Delvari situation was, to use the diplomatic phrasing, complicated. The Torathi separatist cells had been using the outposts surrounding Badlands as a staging area for the past 3 months, disrupting supply lines to the inner colony worlds, and making life extremely unpleasant for everyone involved. They were not a massive force, but they were entrenched, they were clever, and they had something that military analysts had been describing in increasingly alarmed tones as structural patience, which was a polished way of saying they were willing to wait as long as it took to make everyone else exhausted before they moved. The Compact had sent soldiers. Soldiers had encountered prepared positions, retreated, and requested reinforcements. Reinforcements had encountered different prepared positions, retreated faster, and requested specialists. Specialists, apparently, came in the form of a 19-year-old human with a thermos and an eye for blind spots. This briefed her that evening in the operations room, using the holographic terrain display and 2 hours of carefully prepared tactical analysis. Kael sat across from him, legs stretched out, thermos balanced on her knee, watching the floating topographical map with an expression of focused calm. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The Torathi cell," she said. "How many are we talking?" Current estimates suggest between 60 and 80 combatants across 3 primary positions. Supplies? Resupplied via underground cache networks, mapped approximately here, here, and here. He indicated the points on the display. Rotation schedules? Unknown. Response times when you've probed the outer positions? Between 4 and 7 minutes before reinforcement arrives from the secondary, from the east or the west. This paused. He checked his notes. He looked at Pruvok. Pruvok's ridges were doing something complicated. The reports do not specify directional origin of reinforcement. Kael nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they have learned something that answers a question they hadn't asked yet. Okay, she said. I want to run a solo probe of the eastern approach tonight. The room went very quiet. A solo probe, Vethis repeated. Just to watch. I won't engage. Specialist. The eastern approach is within direct visual range of the Torathi primary position. If they detect, they won't. She said it the way a person states an observable fact. Not a boast, not bravado, just a flat, simple declaration of something she considered already settled. Vethis found this somehow more unsettling than if she had been loudly confident. He approved the probe under protest. He spent the next 4 hours sitting in the operations room, watching the sensor feed from the eastern approach, seeing absolutely nothing move, and periodically asking Pruvok whether the sensors were functioning correctly. Kael came back at 2 in the morning. She was completely silent until she was standing directly behind the sensor operator, who made an extremely undignified sound and knocked over a water vessel. She had mud on one knee and a small scratch on her forearm that she did not appear to have noticed. She sat down across from Vethis, pulled out a worn piece of paper, and began drawing a diagram from memory. Their rotation schedule, she said, sliding the paper across to him. They swap positions every 90 minutes. The reinforcement comes from the west, not the east. They're using a narrow ravine about 300 meters north of your marked position as the transit corridor. They've got 2 snipers elevated on the ridge, but they rotate for meals and both gaps overlap for about 4 minutes around dawn. Veth. This looked at the diagram. He looked at Kael. He looked at the diagram again. You observed all of this in 4 hours. 4 hours and 20 minutes. Also, she added, as if it had just occurred to her, there's a 7th cache site your maps don't have. Here, she tapped a point on the diagram. Probably why their supply numbers never quite made sense. Pruvok, behind him, said ancestors have mercy in his native language. What Vethis expected, after this, was that Kael would present a careful, methodical plan, something involving coordinated strikes, supporting fire, timed movements across multiple phases. This was how military planning worked. You gathered intelligence, you processed it, you constructed an operation from it, and you executed the operation over a period of days while adjusting for the inevitable deviations from expectation. What Kael presented the following morning, over a cup of very dark human coffee, was this. Dawn patrol gap, 4 minutes. 1 person through the ravine, hit the main supply cache, collapse the transit corridor, be out before the rotation closes. 1 person. You're suggesting, Vethis said slowly, that you go in alone, during a 4-minute window into the primary logistical core of a 60 to 80 combatant separatist cell. 62, she said. I got a cleaner count last night than I thought. And you would do this alone. If I take a team, the window closes before we're halfway through the ravine. Alone, I can make it in 90 seconds. She paused. 80, if I'm not being careful about noise. But I'll be careful about noise. Pruvok leaned over to Vethis and said, in a murmur that was not nearly as private as he intended, is this normal human tactical doctrine? This, who had by this point read 4 separate academic papers on human combat psychology in a single anxious night, said, I am beginning to suspect there is no such thing as normal human tactical doctrine. He approved the operation. He is still not entirely certain why. Perhaps it was the diagrams. Perhaps it was the 7th cache site. Perhaps it was simply that when a creature looks you calmly in all 4 of your eyes and tells you something is settled, some ancient and non-rational part of the brain decides to believe them. At 031 Thor, the following morning, Kael Dunmore went through the ravine. At 0316, which is to say 2 minutes later, the sensor feeds registered a pressure event consistent with structural collapse somewhere in the northeast quadrant. At 0317, 3 more events in rapid succession. At 0319, the Torathi tactical communication frequency, which the Compact's intelligence division had been unsuccessfully trying to crack for 6 weeks, erupted into what was later described in the official report as significant command disorganization. At 0320, which is to say 4 minutes and approximately 30 seconds after she had entered the ravine, Kael Dunmore walked back into Outpost Delvari 9 through the eastern gate, wiped a streak of something dark from her cheek with the back of her hand, and said, "Someone should probably hit the north and south caches in the next 20 minutes while they're still sorting out what happened. I'd say you've got a window." This Oran, commander of Delvari 9, veteran of 3 full military campaigns and 14 documented engagements, stood in his operations room and watched a 19-year-old human eat a protein bar while his entire staff scrambled to execute a follow-on operation that no one had known they were going to need. He said, to nobody in particular, "She was in there for 6 minutes. Pruvox ridges had gone a color that did not technically have a name in standard Dravathi. 4 minutes 47 seconds, sir. I timed it. By Vor 400, the Torathi north and south caches were gone. By Vor 500, the separatist cell's 3 primary positions had gone dark as their logistical network collapsed under the sudden and catastrophic absence of supplies that had seemed, until approximately 90 minutes prior, perfectly secure. By Vor 600, with the Delvari sun beginning its slow crawl over the red Badland ridgelines, the first Torathi commanders were requesting terms. This was standing on the outpost wall watching the eastern approach when Kael came to stand beside him. She had her thermos again. She looked rested. He was not certain she had slept at all. "You expected this to take longer," she said. "The analyst projected 7 to 10 days," he said. "Minimum." She nodded. She looked out at the Badlands, at the long amber light spreading across the dust. "Analysts project from precedent," she said. "Precedent assumes the opponent gets to react." This turned to look at her. He had 4 eyes, and he used all of them. "You designed the operation specifically so they would not have time to react. I designed the operation specifically so they would not even have time to understand what was happening before it was already over." She sipped from her thermos. There's a difference. There was something in the way she said it. Not cruelty, not arrogance. Something quieter than that. Something that had been built, he thought, from a long familiarity with being underestimated and an equally long familiarity with exactly what to do with that. Behind them, in the operations room, he could hear his staff filing reports, sending communiques, trying to explain to their superiors in language that would be believed how a 7-decade entrenched separatist cell had been strategically dismantled between midnight and sunrise by a single specialist who had arrived on a transport shuttle less than 36 hours ago. He thought about the forms he would have to fill out. He thought about the reports. He thought about the look on his administrative officer's face when he explained that the estimated 7 to 10-day operation had concluded before most of the staff had finished breakfast. He thought about the human standing next to him, watching the sunrise with the expression of someone doing a quiet, private accounting of a job completed. "The compact will have questions," he said. "They always do," she said. "About you, specifically." She smiled at that. Not a large smile. Not a particularly warm one. The kind of smile that knew something you didn't. "They can ask," she said. "Doesn't mean the answers will make them feel better." Nobody in the Galactic Compact's senior command structure believed the initial report. This was, in retrospect, understandable. The report stated that a single Terran specialist, operating alone, in a sub-5-minute window, had collapsed the logistical infrastructure of a 62-member entrenched separatist cell without taking a single casualty, without requiring air support, without requesting backup, and without, apparently, breaking a significant sweat. The report then noted that the entire operation, from first probe to enemy surrender, had taken less than 18 hours from the specialist's arrival at the outpost. Fleet Admiral Shurev Tanathi, who commanded the Compact's 5th operational sector from a very large ship with very comfortable chairs, read the report twice, set it down, and told his aide to get Commander Vethis Oran on a secure channel immediately. The conversation that followed lasted 40 minutes. Vethis answered every question with the careful precision of an officer who knew that what he was saying sounded implausible and had decided that accuracy was more important than credibility. He confirmed the timeline. He confirmed the solo operation. He confirmed the 6 minutes, later corrected to 4 minutes 47 seconds. He confirmed that the specialist in question was 19 years old, present rank of specialist, 41 prior confirmed engagements, and that she was currently in the outpost's small commissary, eating what humans called breakfast and what appeared to be a frankly alarming quantity of food for an organism her size. Shurav Tanathi was quiet for a long moment. "I want her brought to the Resolute," he said. Immediately, Vidis paused. "Sir, the specialist is technically still on assignment rotation. Her orders don't— I am rewriting her orders. Have her on a shuttle within the hour." Vidis looked across the operations room to where Pruvok was making the face that meant he had heard every word of the conversation and was deeply uncertain about what came next. Vidis shared the feeling. He went to the commissary. Kael was working through a plate of something orange and eating with the focused efficiency of someone fueling a machine. She looked up when Vethis appeared in the doorway, read his expression and said, "Who wants to talk to me?" "Fleet Admiral Shurav Tanathi. He commands the entire 5th sector." She considered this the way someone considers whether to take an umbrella when the sky looks uncertain. He's probably got questions. He has many questions. "They always start with questions," she said, and finished the last of her food with 2 efficient bites, and stood up. "Okay, let's go." The Resolute was the kind of ship that was designed to make visitors feel small. It was 1,100 meters of compact military engineering, bristling with enough firepower to sterilize a continent, and crewed by 4,000 personnel who had all been selected for both competence and the ability to project absolute authority in every direction simultaneously. The docking bay alone was larger than most of the installations Vethis had commanded in his career. Kael walked off the shuttle, looked up at the vaulted ceiling of the docking bay, and said, in the tone of someone mildly impressed by a moderately tall building. Admiral Shurav Tanathi met them personally, which was not something admirals did. He was Velhari, and Velhari expressed their seniority through the elaborate bioluminescent patterns that developed along their dorsal membranes with age. Tanathis were the deep, complex gold of someone who had been doing this for a very long time. He had brought 2 aides, a security officer, and the Compact's chief military analyst, a pressy named Dovak Trell, whose species had 8 fingers and used all of them to take notes simultaneously. He looked at Kael the way Vethis had looked at her, initially at the transport shuttle. The brief recalibration, the assessment, the decision to set aside expectation and deal with observable reality. "Specialist Dunmore," he said. "Admiral," she said. "I have read the report from Delvari 9 4 times. Vidis writes good reports." Something moved in Tanathi's bioluminescent patterns that Vethis thought might be amusement, though he was not fluent enough in Velhari expression to be certain. "Walk me through the operation," he said. "From the beginning, in your own words." What followed was 2 hours in the Resolute's primary briefing room. Kael sat across from the admiral, the analyst, the aides, and 3 additional officers who had apparently been summoned mid-meeting because word traveled fast on a ship with 4,000 people. She walked through the probe, the rotation schedule, the ravine, the 4-minute window, the cache locations, the decision to go alone, the execution. She was precise. She was unhurried. She answered every question directly and without elaboration unless elaboration was specifically requested. Dovak Trell's 8 fingers moved continuously. The 3 additional officers had stopped taking notes and were simply watching her with the expression of people having a privately significant experience. At the end, Tanathi leaned back and said, "You made this decision, the solo insertion, in approximately 12 hours after arrival." "Less than that," she said. "I had the outline of it maybe 3 hours after the briefing. I used the rest of the time to confirm the details I needed before committing." "You confirmed them by conducting an unauthorized 4-hour reconnaissance of an active enemy position alone in the dark. It wasn't unauthorized." Commander Vethis approved the probe. He approved a probe. He did not, I suspect, anticipate the thoroughness of it. Kael tilted her head slightly, in what Vethis had come to recognize as the human gesture for acknowledging a fair point. "Probably not," she agreed. Tanathi looked at Dovak Trell. The analyst looked up from 8 sets of notes with an expression Vethis couldn't read. Something passed between them in the silent language of people who have worked together long enough to communicate without words. Then Tanathi said, "Specialist, the Compact is currently facing a situation on the Vithani corridor that has resisted resolution for 4 months. I have 1,200 soldiers in the field, 2 contested supply lines, and an entrenched opposing force whose tactical patience is, to use the assessment from my own analysts, Exceptional. Kael nodded once. I've heard of the Vithani situation. I would like your assessment of it. Not the Compact's assessment. Yours. She was quiet for a moment. Send me the raw field reports. Not the summaries. The actual field reports, all of them, including the ones that got buried because the conclusions were inconvenient. Tanathi looked at his aide. The aide looked uncertain about whether sharing 4 months of classified raw field data with a 19-year-old specialist was something that required additional authorization. Tanathi's bioluminescent patterns said something brief and decisive. The aide began pulling files. Kael spent 3 hours reading. She sat at a terminal in a side room, read with the total focused stillness of someone for whom the outside world had temporarily ceased to exist, and emerged with 2 pages of handwritten notes and an expression like a person who has just located the source of an irritating sound. Your analysts are wrong about the supply lines, she said, coming back into the briefing room and spreading her notes on the table. The Eastern line isn't the primary logistics route. It's a decoy. They've been letting you pressure it because every time you do, your forces commit to the Eastern approach, and the actual resupply runs through the agricultural zone here, in plain sight, labeled as civilian transport. The 4 months of stalemate isn't patience. It's them watching you exhaust yourself on a problem they designed specifically to be unsolvable. The room was very quiet. That's, Dovak Trell said, and stopped. Started again. The civilian transport volume in that corridor was flagged as anomalous in week 2. It was reviewed and classified as non-tactical. By who? A pause. The Eastern Analysis Division, who were, at that point, already committed to the Eastern supply line theory. A longer pause. Trell's 8 fingers had gone still. How long to confirm this? Tanathi said, and his voice had shifted into a register that Vethis recognized from his own senior officers, the particular tone of someone who has realized they need to act quickly and is in the process of deciding what quickly means. 4 hours for confirmation if you route surveillance assets to the agricultural corridor, Kael said. Probably less. The transport pattern should be obvious once you know what you're looking for. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes. The surveillance confirmed the agricultural corridor was running 4 times the expected vehicle mass for the listed cargo type. Follow-on analysis confirmed 3 forward staging areas that had not appeared in any prior intelligence assessment. The Eastern supply line, which 1,200 compact soldiers had been contesting for 4 months at considerable expense and casualty, was, as Kael had said, a decoy, constructed with enough logistical detail to be convincing and maintained with enough actual low-level activity to sustain belief in it. Shurav Tanathi stood in the briefing room and looked at the updated display for a long time. Then he looked at Kael. How, he said. And his bioluminescent patterns were doing something complex and slow, like deep water moving. Did you see this in 3 hours? She was quiet for a moment, in the way she was quiet when she was being precise rather than fast. The field reports from the junior officers in the Eastern Corridor kept noting that contact felt managed, she said. Not defeated, not evaded, managed, like the opposition knew exactly how hard to push back. That's not what a real supply line defense looks like. A real defense gets desperate when you get close. This one stayed consistent. Consistent defense of a logistics route means either they don't care if you take it, or they need you to think they do. Dovak Trell had been writing with all 8 fingers for 30 seconds, and then stopped and said, very quietly, "We have 16 analysts with a combined 400 years of military assessment experience." "Yes," said Kael, in the tone of someone who was not saying anything unkind. There was a different quality to the room after that. Not the polite, skeptical attention of senior officers evaluating an anomalous report. Something more careful, more considered. The kind of attention you pay to something when you have stopped trying to explain it away and started trying to understand it. Tanathi dismissed everyone except Vethis and Kael. He stood at the viewport for a moment, looking out at the hard starfield beyond the hull. "The Compact is going to want to know what to do with you," he said, to Kael, to the viewport. "They always do," she said. Vethis recognized the phrase. She had said it on the wall at Delvari 9, watching the sunrise. She said it the same way now. "You are 19 years old with a specialist's rank, and you have, in less than 48 hours, resolved one engagement that was projected to take 10 days and potentially broken open a 4-month strategic stalemate." He turned from the viewport, The compact system does not have a clear category for that. The compact system was built to categorize things that had happened before, she said. You can't pre-build a category for something new. He looked at her with the long, slow attention of a very old and experienced officer. What would you do, he said, if you were advising the compact on what to do with someone like you? She didn't hesitate. Put her somewhere she can see the problems before they become the problems. Not behind the front line. Not in the briefing room after the fact. At the point where the information is raw and the interpretation is still open, she'll tell you what's wrong before your analysts have finished building the theory that prevents them from seeing it. Tanathi looked at Vethis. Vethis, who had spent 48 hours in a state of continuous recalibration of his understanding of what a single person could do, said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the last 48 hours had not already said better. By nightfall, the official compact communique regarding the Delvari 9 operation had reached 17 sector commands. By the following morning, it had been forwarded, unofficially and through the faster channels of military gossip, to approximately 40 more. The version that traveled through the unofficial channels was, as these things always are, more colorful than the official report. It had gained details. It had shed some of the careful bureaucratic language. It had acquired, the way stories do when they move through people who are impressed and do not quite have the vocabulary for it, the weight and shape of something larger than a single operation. The version that most people heard, in the end, was this. A human girl showed up at a contested outpost. Her first engagement lasted less than 5 minutes. The enemy surrendered before the sun came up. Then she sat in a room for 3 hours and broke a 4-month stalemate that had 400 years of combined analytical experience completely stumped. None of that was precisely wrong. Some of it was even, in the important ways, precise. Kael Dunmore, Specialist, 3rd Rapid Response Division, Terran Combined Forces, was 23 days from her 20th birthday, when she became, in the informal but durable currency of military legend, a name that people said with a particular tone. Not awe, exactly. Not fear. Something between the two, with a thread of something almost like relief in it, the strange comfort of knowing that somewhere, on your side, there exists a person who looks at the problems everyone else has stopped being able to see, and says, simply quietly, without drama or fanfare, "Yeah, I see it. Give me the window." She would, in the years that followed, give the compact 14 more of those moments. Each one would become its own story. Each story would travel through the unofficial channels and arrive at the 40 sector commands with new details and the same essential truth. But that is a different part of the telling. This part ends here, on the Resolute, with Kael finishing the last of a second cup of very dark human coffee, and a fleet admiral watching her with the expression of a man revising quietly and completely everything he thought he knew about the shape of a soldier. Outside the viewport, the stars held their positions, patient and ancient, indifferent to the small but significant recalibration happening in the room behind the glass. Inside, a legend was still too new to know it was a legend yet. It rarely does.